My guest, Robert Greene, is one of the great thinkers and writers of our time. His book, The 48 Laws of Power, written 22 years ago, is still on the Amazon and New York Times top 50 bestsellers, with millions of copies sold worldwide. From his books, The Art of Seduction, to his works on mastery and the laws of human nature, Robert explores our inner qualities and how we can utilize them to the best of our ability. Now, with his most recent book, The Daily Laws, his goal is to reverse our toxic patterns and draw out our true creativity so we can excel like never before. And as always, a very special thanks to my patrons who make this podcast possible. If you enjoy listening, please subscribe and visit my website, barrykibrick.com, to become a patron or just to get in touch with me. I appreciate hearing from you and, as always, will answer all your emails. Now, enjoy my conversation with the brilliant Robert Greene. Robert, as you know from before, you still have the record as being the person most on my show. You've been on for every single book you've written, and I am so grateful to have you on for this one, The Daily Laws. Welcome, Mr. Greene.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Mr. Kibrick, and I'm really excited about this new platform that you have here. Podcast world. It's blowing up. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We're hoping it's going to keep blowing. You know, you still also, you help me get the most views. Whenever I'm doing anything with a Robert Greene, we get the best.
Oh.
We get the best. You're as popular around the world as ever, and it keeps growing,
Wow.
Robert.
Wow. Who knew? Yeah. That's I would have never guessed 25 years ago that I'd be at this point, but I'm very humbled and very grateful for it.
Well, you know, it's, I think, because everything you do, it has purpose, and you make certain of it. You even write about that in the laws, and the Daily Laws. What's the first time you're really bringing out more of yourself in this book as well? It's a bit, I don't want to call it quite a memoir because it's not really that detailed of a memoir, but we see how you came about doing what you do. And what you do is encourage people to do what you do. So it's kind of a neat little thing.
Yeah, I've always been a little bit shy about doing that. I like kind of disguising myself in my books. So certainly with all of my books, there's very much a part of me in there and my experience, but you can't really ever guess it because I disguise it in the book. So it was a little bit odd for me. I'm not quite comfortable with writing about myself, but I managed to overcome my own misgivings about that and put that in there because I thought it was important for this particular book to do it.
I think so too, because I want to let people know that this book, in my opinion, needs to be not written differently, needs to be read in two ways. I enjoyed reading it not at one sitting, but as a book itself, just reading through the whole thing. But it's also designed because you do it by the day. There's 366 laws here that are done by the day. It's also really appropriate to keep it by your bedside or your desk and just go through the daily laws, because each one of them sort of is a form of nourishing of the inner spirit.
Yes. I mean, I'm somebody who, for better or worse, is really into rituals. It's kind of the way a writer tends to organize his or her life. So I like to do the same things every morning. I get up and I meditate for some 45 minutes. And, I have these everyday rituals when I shower, etc. So it gives my life a kind of a rhythm. And so I think it's very nice in this world where everything is changing so quickly and people are all kind of scattered and overwhelmed with information, to go back to something very ancient and very grounded, which is a sense of ritual, doing something every day and letting the ideas in my books kind of sink in. The hope is that you carry with you throughout the day the idea that I'm discussing for that day, and that you think about it and that you meditate upon it. And it kind of gets under your skin a little bit and it causes you maybe to reflect on your life differently. So I love the daily aspect of anything that I do.
Well, you actually, in the beginning, you actually tell us that's what this is for. It is to reflect on us and how, in a sense, we're all flawed and everyone is, as you say. But by doing this, you really want us to have a greater empathy for ourselves and an acceptance of other people. And that's what this is really. You want to alter the negative patterns that we all have. And this is what you do throughout the book. And you take elements from your other books, from Seduction, from the 48 Laws of Power, from Mastery, from the Laws of Human Nature. And you use a lot of those essences to help shape one's inner being.
Right. Well, it's something that was a major theme in the Laws of Human Nature, which is you don't really know yourself, right? And it's a troubling thought if you let it sink in, because it is the truth, I'm afraid, that maybe you understand about 2% of who you are, maybe 5%, maybe at the highest levels of people who are very self-aware, it may reach 10%. But essentially, so much of what you do is unconscious, right? Is automatic. You don't really have access to why your brain is suddenly bringing up this particular thought, why you're feeling this particular emotion. Sometimes it's clear, I'm angry because somebody said this, but often the root of that anger you don't really have access to. So I want you to take the starting point that you are a great mystery to yourself, that your life, it's like Oedipus and the Sphinx. The Sphinx held a riddle for Thebes. And the person who solved that riddle, then kind of the play goes away and that person becomes the king. Your riddle that the Sphinx is posing is, who are you? What is your motivation? What really drives you in life? And if you can solve that riddle to some degree, you're going to have power and you're going to have a sense of fulfillment. So the book is structured in that way. It begins with looking at yourself and your career and the path you have chosen in your particular endeavor, and whether you want to maybe make a course correction or maybe you want to choose a different path. And then I go into your relationship to toxic people and how you can change that. You don't have to be a victim all of the time if you understand why you're attracted to people like that. So it all begins with you and your self-awareness. And that's the key to everything in all of my books. So yeah, that's basically what the book is designed for, to look at yourself and see your own flaws. Believe me, I have plenty of them. I'm not exempt from this either.
But I think what's important, Robert, is that when we look at our flaws, we have to, and you guide us through this as well, but we have to look at them with a gentler eye. Because if anything, I find out that good people are usually much more self-critical than they are critical of other people. And I think that self-criticism, if taken to too much of a level, is actually a dangerous thing. Not to the level that you want to take it to, which is, you want to understand yourself. As you say, the seed at birth is planted for you to be able to fulfill your destiny. But I think people need to be kinder to themselves while they're searching for this. Too many people get into a depressed spiral when things don't seem to fill into their destiny.
Yes, and I certainly have that flaw. I can be a little too self-critical with myself. I need to be more of a kind parent in relating to who I am. But I think it all depends on your perspective. I kind of think of it as like a stance that you have. I'm thinking of like a warrior in samurai battles. If you ever watch Kurosawa movies, which I'm addicted to, Toshiro Mifune has this particular power stance before he goes into a big sword fight. It's balanced, it's calm, he's observing. So it all depends on how you possess yourself. So if you're calm, if you have a degree of detachment from who you are, if you're not so entwined with your own ego and your own insecurities, if you can take a step back and look at yourself with some distance, then that criticizing voice has a different feel than if there is no distance. If everything is so personal and it's such a reflection of your ego, then if you start criticizing yourself, you kind of wither up and you can't stand it, and it does spiral into what, downward, as you say. But if you're able to step back and say, I'm looking at Robert Greene almost from a few feet away, and I'm seeing that he has these particular flaws. And it's okay, Robert. You don't need to, it's not to beat you up, but you can work on this, you can change it. But if you can't be aware of your own flaws, you can never change yourself. So the greater danger in life is not being self-critical, which you can fix with that bit of distance that I'm talking about. The greatest danger in life is no self-awareness at all, for imagining that everybody else in the world is to blame for everything that goes wrong in your life, which is a fallacy, because a lot of it stems from you, and thinking that way allows you to change it. So to me, being self-aware, if it comes with a bit of criticism, you can generally handle it, because most of us have enough self-esteem to bounce back from that kind of negative feelings about ourselves. But without any kind of critical voice in your head, boy, you're in for a lot of trouble in life, I believe.
I totally agree. In fact, I like to use the words, don't blame yourself. Take responsibility for yourself. When you do that, you're able to respond to those negative emotions with a distance. And in fact, you actually send it home when you say these words. You say, no matter how you look at yourself, even embrace your weirdness. There's nothing wrong with that. Embrace it. Just don't. And that's why you need to be aware, but embrace it. Love the fact that maybe you procrastinate. Okay, big deal. You can figure out, like you say, how to act better and do better. But if you embrace your flaws, you almost, and your uniqueness. Weirdness also implies your uniqueness. That's another thing you want us to realize, is how unique we are. It really is a way for us to embrace all experiences that we have.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things there. I hope I can remember it all. But I talked in the Laws of Human Nature about your character, and that your character is something that's formed very deep and early on in life, something genetic about it. It's the part of you that's your essence that defines who you are. And all of us, to some degree, carry these deep wounds from our childhood. That could be something that our parents didn't give us. It could be something from our siblings or early education or whatever. And we carry these wounds throughout our lives. And I talk in that particular chapter about people who understand the wounds that they have and are able to use them for something constructive and for something productive, instead of kind of wallowing in them. And I mentioned, like, the great actress Joan Crawford, the great Hollywood actress Joan Crawford, who had one of the most miserable childhoods. She was essentially an orphan. She was ignored and abused by her mother. Her father ran away, etc. And she knew she had these issues around always searching for men for love and affection and validation. It was her wound. It was her weakness. It was her deepest flaw. And she thought to herself, how can I change that into something that I can use? And in Hollywood, she ended up doing that with trying to find love and affection from directors, from the audience, from getting a kind of fulfillment for healing her wound through her work, through projecting herself into other characters and connecting with people and film directors. So you can be aware of your flaws in a deep way, and then you can take it to another level where you don't like fight them. You don't try and repress them. You don't try and whitewash them and appear like you're this saint or this paragon of virtue. Instead, you can find a way to make use of them. So for instance, I know that one of my flaws is I have a bit of an anger. I have anger issues. There are things that really frustrate me and piss me off, to be honest. And it could have been I could have turned that anger inward, which is what a lot of people do when you become sort of self-hating. Instead, I managed to channel it into my books, and I give that anger, gives an impetus to everything I write. So a subtext is Robert is kind of angry about the hypocrisy in the world when it comes to things like power, right? Robert is angry at how bad people are strategists in this world. I'm angry because people don't understand what genius is and how they possess the ability, as we say, to embrace their weirdness and become an Einstein. So I channel it into something productive, but I can only do that if I'm very clear about my own flaws, you know? And the embrace the weirdness is very important because so many young people today, particularly, are sort of afraid of what makes them different, of what makes them unique. It's a function of social media to an extent, where you're so hyper aware of what other people are doing that you're influenced by that, and you're kind of afraid of what makes you stand out, of what makes you different, of what makes you weird, and that pull that all of us feel to conform to what other people are doing is even more powerful now in the era of social media. So latching onto what makes you different and unique and weird is more important now than ever. And it's a major theme in several of my books.
Well, you say also, you were talking about our character, and you mentioned Crawford, and you say that our character is not necessarily have to be what we were born with. We can remake ourselves into a character of power, since power is also one of the things, as you just said, you look at and you know how important it is for us to feel. We can, even if we are not in that sphere or feel that we were born a certain way, we have that ability to manipulate, to study, to understand, and create the character that we want to be.
Well, I mean, most powerful people in the world who've had great success in politics or business or arts, they start off as children, as very weak individuals who have no power in life. And unless you're born with incredible, like, you know, a trust fund or billions of dollars and it's sent to Harvard and Yale, and you have that kind of golden spoon in your mouth, most of us don't have that. We have to start with nothing. So any great person in history, from a Churchill to a de Gaulle to a great writer like a Virginia Woolf, et cetera, they've all started from positions of nothing. They had to create their own power, and they had to learn how it was, what their own strengths were, what they could rely on, what their weaknesses are. So in the biography of anybody who's successful, which is something that I'm obsessed with, and is at the basis of so much of my research, there are always these moments in their adolescence, in their early 20s, where they're not powerful, where they haven't figured life out, where things aren't going so well for them. And in Daily Laws, I catalog that in my own life, where I was lost and things were going against me. But if your eyes are open, if you're willing to learn, if you have some of that self-awareness and you observe the people around you, you can change yourself. You can create and remake yourself. As I say in the 48 Laws of Power, recreate yourself. You can recreate yourself to some degree and become a person of power. Everybody has that potential. But first, you have to change yourself into someone who's observant and who can look both at yourself and at other people and understand that you have a desire for power. So everything begins from a position of self-awareness.
And in order to do this at the highest level, you let us know that we must retain our sense of wonder. By doing that, it almost, by the nature of that itself, it opens up our pathways to absorb the things that you just talked about. Because when we look at things with that sense of wonder and awe, we almost become self-liberated.
It's something that is very close to me right now because I'm writing my new book, which is The Law of the Sublime. And I'm writing a chapter on childhood and the kind of the world and the mind and the consciousness that we had as children. And all of us pretty much began from that position where we had incredible curiosity, incredible sense of wonder. Our minds were very plastic. Everything we looked at seemed new and surprising. We had this incredible hunger to learn. And what happens as we get older is that kind of reverses. So a child is in a position of tremendous weakness in the world and needs to overcome that weakness by learning about how things operate and what things are. And as we get older, we think of that reverses and we think we are so big and so powerful. I'm 22. I don't need to read anymore. I don't need to learn anymore. I figured everything out for myself, right? My ideas are set. My politics is set. This is the way the world is. I know it. I understand it. And once that happens, your brain starts slowly closing. It's like a door that starts going down, 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 and you stop learning. And it's a deadly process, and you're not even aware that it's happening. And in your 20s and 30s, as your mind closes down, you start losing the plastic nature of your brain. Your creativity dries up. Your excitement, your emotional involvement in the world dries up. And that little child that you were is like a dead thing inside of you that you carry, that the child within you has died, right? And the most interesting people in the world, the ones who we revere, like a Da Vinci or one of the other great in American history of Benjamin Franklin, people always commented on them when they were in their 50s. Da Vinci died in his 60s, but Benjamin Franklin lived well into his 80s, that they were still like children. They still had that kind of childlike spirit. So you want to retain this idea that you are still a weak child. You have everything to learn. And this universe that you inhabit is so awesome and so sublime that you are constantly filled with a sense of wonder. And Einstein said that that was the key to his success as a scientist. Everything that he approached, every problem, it was like a mystery that he had to solve. And it made him feel like very small and weak in relation to it.
And the one thing, like the child and like an Einstein or like even an Edison or a Steve Jobs, whoever you want to use in that vein, none of them are afraid of mistakes or failures. In fact, they embrace them because that, in a sense, I think it was Edison that had that great line, I never failed at making the light bulb. I found 1,000 ways of not making the light bulb. And that's another thing that a child has besides a sense of wonder, is he doesn't even know what mistakes to make. So, if you can relieve that pressure of, boy, it's got to be right, it's got to be this way, it's got to be that way, and let yourself flow more with your wonder and not be afraid of it, it makes another layer of difference in how you can achieve mastery.
Well, I can speak from experience. Anybody who's like tried to write a book or a piece of music or even start a business or anything like that, where you're starting from nothing, you have a sense of anxiety, right? Like there's nothing there and I have to create it. And it makes you nervous. Like, where do I begin? Am I doing the right thing? And if you get too caught up in that anxiety of everything has to be right and everything has to be perfect, you're never going to write your book. You're never going to create your business. You're never going to learn, and I can honestly tell you that the first draft of everything that I write is absolutely miserable. It's terrible. If people read it, they would think Robert is totally bluffing. This guy is worthless, right? And I allow that to happen because I know that the third, the fourth, the fifth draft will start to get readable. And maybe by the 20th draft, it becomes what I want. But when you make a mistake, when you allow yourself, when you're not so caught up, it's that little bit of distance from yourself that I talked about that is the key to, I think, success and power in this life. If you have that bit of distance, then making a mistake doesn't make you feel like you're a bad person or that you're worthless or that you don't know what you're doing. It's a learning experience. This went wrong. Why did it happen? I can learn from that. Whereas if you're successful, if everything you do is wonderful, you have no opportunity to learn, right? And usually not everything you do is wonderful. So if you can realize that mistakes and failures and flaws in your work are the key to learning and improving yourself, then, everything turns around. But it starts from that position that I'm talking about, that chorus, that Toshiro Mifunepa's stance, where you're not so caught up in your ego and you can look at yourself from some distance and say, I made a mistake. All right, how do I learn from it? As opposed to, I made a mistake and boy, am I stupid and worthless. That's the whole difference here.
Well, by doing that, you say we will develop the boldness required. And there is a sense of boldness that has to come about as well, but it can only be by doing it just as you said, because without that boldness, you are again too much afraid to take the chance or make the mistake. So they kind of feed off each other, don't they? There's a sort of a cyclical sense here. You've got to be bold enough to make the mistake and be able to develop because of the mistake and then go back to your boldness. So it works sort of circuitous in a positive way. I don't mean like going in circles. I'm more like a spiral, always moving upward.
Yeah, very well put, Barry. But so the icon for that for me would be Henry Ford, maybe perhaps our greatest entrepreneur. And Henry Ford in the 1890s, he was kind of this person who was obsessed with car engines and the combustible engine and creating a car. And he was very young and he decided, I'm going to create the first car company. And this was a very grandiose thing for someone so young to do. And also, automobile companies were one of the hardest things to start up because it required so much money and it required so much overhead, et cetera. He did it, and it was a failure. And once you failed in starting up an automobile company, you rarely got a second chance because you were kind of tainted by it, and nobody would give you money anymore. Because no, I'm going to start up a second one. Okay. People go, well, you can't do that. Well, he managed to find some crazy person who would give him the money for it. He started up his second company. It failed again. But that's it. Henry Ford is done. And then he said, no, in the first two iterations, I learned how to make the perfect car and assembly line. I'm going to try a third time. And he found some Scotsman who'd never heard of Henry Ford, who had tons of money, and he invested in it. And the third time he created a company, it succeeded. But he said it was only through the failures and the mistakes that he learned how to make the perfect car, right? So behind that is a bit of grandiosity, an incredible sense of confidence. So on the one hand, to put a point on what you're saying, on the one hand, he was able to look at his mistakes and learn from them and not take them personally. On the second hand, he was so bold as to think that he could continue trying again and again and get it right, right? So if he had just looked at his mistakes and goes, this was wrong. Okay, yeah, I got to do this differently, but never had that incredible boldness to go start it again, we would have never heard of Henry Ford. So those two kind of work together, and if you're too grandiose, if you're too confident and you're not grounded like he was in his mistakes, then you're just going to create something insane. But those two things where you're grounded, you're learning, you understand your flaws and mistakes, and you have tremendous self-confidence, I think the sky's the limit for anybody like that.
Well, that's what this book's about, is helping us develop all those traits. And one of the ways you say we have to do it is by not struggling against our vulnerabilities or trying to repress them, but put them into play. And that's the sense what I get when you talk about Ford, is that he didn't struggle against those vulnerabilities. He didn't struggle against those mistakes. He didn't try to repress them, but he put them into action. And when you put anything into action, that then all of a sudden takes it to another level.
Yeah, I've been reading for my new book a biography of the great American psychologist William James. He was the brother of the great novelist Henry James, one of the most insanely brilliant families that ever existed. And William James had this idea that he called it his as-if strategies. So in order to heal yourself, you have to act. We are humans that through action, we discover who we are, we discover what we want, and we're able to kind of heal any kind of wounds that we have. But if you're always thinking, if you're always in your head, and you're never acting on your ideas, then everything you just end up kind of beating up on yourself and everything turns inward. And he had this idea that if you're depressed, it's kind of a cliche or a debasement of his words. But if you're depressed and you smile, you make yourself smile, that depression will go away, right?
I always
By
believe that.
taking,
I always say that. In fact, it's true. You can, if you just put a smile on your face, Leonard Cohen said it, act like you want to be, and soon you will be the way you act.
right. And that was William James' kind of great discovery. He called it an as-if strategy. So act as if you believe this certain thing about yourself and it will come true. So if you suddenly, decide to do something with energy, that energy, you'll find the energy to do it with. If you convince yourself that it's there. And that's what happens to so many people when they get older. I'm finding I struggle with myself as I get older, and we're all getting older, I'm afraid, is, oh, I can't do that anymore because I don't have the energy for it. My legs won't carry me up that mountain. My brain won't be able to withstand the tortures of 3 years of writing a book. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You end up kind of destroying your own energy. But if I go, no, I can get up that hill, even though I'm a little bit older, it doesn't matter. I can write that book. Then you find the energy through your action. And then it becomes a different self-fulfilling prophecy.
I love the line I've heard, and it goes, if you believe you're going to succeed, or if you believe you're going to fail, you'll be right either way.
Yeah,
that sounds just
very well put. Exactly. I couldn't put it better. Thank you, Barry.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Listen, there's another thing. You mentioned doors before, but here you use it in a little different way. And you use this in a way that I think is also important, because so many times we feel like we're hitting a wall. And you mentioned that as a door coming down. But you said, and it's a little bit of a twist of what you just said, that an ending was not like a wall, but more like a door. So when you do feel you're coming up against a wall and you think it's the end of something, even if it means you have to shift and change directions, what it really is opening up a new door. So much, there's nothing, in fact, that I can think I've done that actually happened because I was going for it, as much as some door slammed in front of my face and I had to find another path to go in. And you really, throughout the book, you bring that element and weave it through that, it's not an end, it's an open door. There's always a path that you want us to know we can take.
Yeah, my former apprentice, who's now an extremely successful best-selling writer, Ryan Holiday, he wrote a book called The Obstacle is the Way. And it's something I've also written about in my book, so that obstacles and frustrations and things blocking your way forward are actually the path that you have to take. They're actually filled with lots of power for you, right? So in the creative process, when I was writing Mastery, I read something very interesting. I can't remember from what book, but it was written by a neuroscientist, I believe, who said, the moment where you feel most frustrated in any kind of project, creative or a business or whatever you're doing, is actually the most fruitful moment of all. They say it's never darker just before dawn, never lighter. I don't remember the phrase. You can help me there.
Oh, yeah. It's darkest before the dawn. So
right.
It's always the bleakest.
Okay.
Just as, in fact, there's so many times where people have said that if you stop at that moment, it's the next moment that's going to bring the success. You can't not stop at that moment, or the dawn won't come, so to speak. You'll remain in the dark.
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly right. So what that means is often you reach a moment of frustration because you're trying so hard to figure something out. You keep hitting this wall again and again and again. You're tired and you go, I give up. I can't do it anymore. And what's happening is that frustration is actually very rich for the brain. And the brain kind of figures things out and you're not even aware of it. And when you hit that level of frustration, things are actually really going on in the brain. They're trying to figure it out below the level of your consciousness. And solutions are being formulated by all the things you've tried. If you've tried 12 different things, the brain is excited and enriched. You feel the frustration, but the brain is constantly working. A continual theme in the history of creativity is of people who go, it's like the story of Brahms, the great composer. And somebody said, well, Brahms, what happened to your fourth symphony? I thought you were composing. And he goes, I couldn't do it. I just decided yesterday to give up. It frustrates me too much. And then the very next day, the solution to it came to him just because he's told somebody that he was giving up. The brain, he now relaxed and the solution came to him. So that moment of maximum frustration is a sign that your brain is working on something and you need to relax for a little bit and not give up and let the process naturally occur. And, it's fascinating how these things occur because so much of our creative energy is below the surface, occurs unconsciously. And this is just sort of one example of that.
Well, you actually say, in fact, in order to see that, you let us know in the laws that we have to sometimes retreat to gain perspective. These are your words. And that retreating is not a sign of weakness, but strength. If you can look back, see with clear eyes the perspective, that's obviously what Brahms did when he did that, didn't he? He realized, oh, I let this out of the bag. I said I'm over and done, but that gave him the freedom then to see, oh no, there it is. So there is an importance in gaining that perspective, and sometimes you can only see that once you hit that wall of frustration. But yet that's also the time you want to stop. We human beings are really, and you bring this out, and in fact, I'm certain this is what's going to be in Sublime as well. You let us know how strangely wonderful we are.
Right. Well, and for my new book, I'm going deep into neuroscience and the brain. And it is a fact for people in sciences that in the entire universe, the known universe, because we can only talk about the known universe, there is nothing as complex as the human brain. There's nothing in the number of cells, the number of synapses, the number of potential connections in the human brain far surpasses the number of stars in the entire known universe. It is the strangest, most miraculous thing in all of creation that we can point to, right? And yet we don't really use it properly. We're not aware of this incredible gift that we were born with, right? We go through life, and this is the subject of the Sublime. We go through life feeling kind of pained, kind of burdened, kind of upset with ourselves, upset with the way the world is. And as that happens, we're not aware of the insanity of the universe that we inhabit, of what it means to be alive in the 21st century. And to think that when you were born with this organ that is so complex at birth, and it has this sort of limitless potential for growth, for expansion, for your creativity, and yet you're only using a tiny portion of this miraculous organ, it should kind of wake you up and sort of alter how you look at yourself and look at your own potential.
Well, I love that at the end of this book, would I be giving this away? No, I don't think so. But at the end of this book, you begin to talk about the cosmic sublime for your next book, and you let us know about this infinite nature and the way we can look at things and, through the infinite and the awesomeness of it. But you really, by doing so, you want us to see ourselves as explorers. That's what you almost wrap up when you're done talking in this book about the sublime. It's to see ourselves as explorers. We can traverse this universe. As you said, we don't even have to go anywhere. There's as much stuff inside us already that we can just ponder. So seeing ourselves as explorers really liberates us, even if we never leave our chair. It's still liberating if we see ourselves as an explorer.
Yeah, and that's a way to kind of keep alive that own sort of childlike curiosity that you have, where you're navigating this world that's full of mysteries and things that you don't know or that you don't understand, and that you're going to explore and find these things out. Yeah, it's an extremely important part of all of my books. But the idea of the sublime in itself is that we live in this universe that is incredibly vast, and we're this tiny, tiny little creatures, right, that live maybe 70, 80 years, 90 years at most in the vast eternity of time. We're insanely insignificant, yet at the same time we, through our consciousness, have been able to understand the most abstruse principles of the universe. I read a book that absolutely blew me away. It's a very technical book. It's called The First 3 Minutes. It's written by a physicist, and he chronicles the first 3 minutes of the universe, right? Now, probably in 100 years from now, it'll be changed, greatly altered what we have discovered. But the idea that we've been able to figure out the Big Bang, we've been able to unsolve all of these incredible mysteries about the formation of stars and galaxies. We understand where the Earth came from, where the moon came from, all these things. It should tell you how incredibly powerful we are, these small little insignificant creatures that are physically weak, but with these brains out there exploring all of the far corners of our universe. It should make us immensely proud of ourselves and our powers in a positive way, as opposed to our immensely destructive powers that we see too often in the world around us.
Well, you even, going into your sublime, you say the universe is mostly dark matter and energy, and yet we are enveloped in what is truly invisible. So that is, again, how much more sublime can you be than that, so to speak, to realize that you are enveloped, and there's no such thing as a void. We know that the universe does not allow a void. There is no void. The space, the emptiness is really still either a field, a frequency. Lord knows what we're going to come up, but the fact, as you say, that we have the ability to come up and think of these things that we can't even see, touch, and only imagine, it really does. There's this great dichotomy by how small we are, as you said, and how significant we are. And there's sort of like it's almost like that little cartoon where there's the good devil on one side of your shoulder and the bad devil on the other side. We have to balance that out because we have this great power, and yet we are just a speck in the spectrum of this universe. I love that we have to play with that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I talk in the Laws of Human Nature about a lot of our negative qualities as a species and our destructive capabilities and our aggressive tendencies and our dark side of human nature. And it's very evident in the world. And it can make you kind of lose faith in humanity. You look at a place like North Korea and you go, how did something like that evolve? Where it's such an oppressive regime and people are so miserable and 98% of the people are starving to death. What is it about humans that create such dystopias, right? It makes you lose faith in us. But then you see this other potential, where we can figure out the ultimate of invisibility, which is the Big Bang, which is the origin of our various universe. There's nothing you can see about it. There's no evidence left, really, although there are waves of energy that seem to have emanated from the Big Bang. But that we're able to solve what is completely invisible to our eyes and figure out the very origin of the world around us should help kind of restore that faith in us. So if only we could become, as a species, more self-aware of that negative side of our nature and able to deal with it and overcome it and bring out more of this explorer side, this insanely powerful brain that we have, we would change that dystopia into something magnificent. But
Robert.
I don't know. I won't live long enough to see that
Oh,
happen.
but you know something, you already tell us it. In your book, you say these words: coming to terms with our dark side, we recognize and examine the dark side of our character. And once we, subject that to our own conscious scrutiny, these are your words, these are not mine, it loses its destructive power. So we can overcome this dark side. Now, can we extend that to overcome the dark side of a nation like North Korea? I'm going to leave that to the bigger brains than I have. But I love the fact that you let us know we can come to terms with our own dark side. And by doing so, it loses its destructive power to at least ourselves.
Yeah, it's a concept that the great psychologist Carl Jung introduced with the idea of the shadow, and that every human being carries a shadow within him or her. And that shadow started off early in your childhood. If you look at groups of 2 or 3 year olds, they can be incredibly destructive and incredibly violent. If you put a room together of 2 year olds, they'll be hitting each other, pulling each other's hair, etc., doing all kinds of things. And at the same time, they can also be very sweet and loving. So when we were children, we had this kind of complete nature. We could be very mean, very mischievous, very destructive, but we could also be very sweet and kind of angelic, right? We had a complete nature. And as we get older in life, our parents start telling us, Robert, don't behave like that. It's bad. It makes me look bad. You're not going to like you. Our fellow students start making us feel ashamed for doing this or that. Our teachers tell us, don't be like this, be like that, right? And slowly as we get older, that kind of energy that is in that darker side, because it has a lot of energy, gets pushed down deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, right? Until we appear to be these kind of saintly, virtuous people walking around in life who only do good, completely unaware of this darker side that still is turning inside of us. And where it appears, it'll appear as in your 20s and 30s in your dreams, where all kinds of weird things start happening. You can't completely repress it. It'll appear in emotions that overcome you. You really dislike this person, or you feel really angry or bitter about this. You don't necessarily act on it, but you feel it. It'll come out in very odd behavior, where suddenly you make some decision that's incredibly irrational. And what's the first thing you do? Because we see that with celebrities in the world who are caught with their pants down. Oh, that wasn't me. That's not who I am. That just happened once. That's not me. Well, in fact, the Jungian work of the shadow says that is exactly who you are. That dark side is exactly what you've been repressing. It is a part of you. And that behavior that came out only once is actually a very deep sign of who you are and what you're dealing with. And so the most important thing is not to give in to all of your destructive, aggressive tendencies that we all have, because that won't help the world around us. But it's to first acknowledge that you have this energy, right? And then to find a way to channel it. I talked about it earlier, how I channeled my anger. A lot of athletes who are the most successful, like a Kobe Bryant, a Michael Jordan, a Tiger Woods, they have intense, aggressive impulses, right? And they channel it into being very competitive. And in sports, you can be as competitive as you want to be. In fact, that is exactly what will make you successful. If you're an artist, taking your anger and taking that dark energy and expressing it in your film or your book is actually a source of power. And then if you feel anger about some injustice in the world, you channel that dark energy into creating some good, into some cause. But understand that the dark side of your nature is full of power. It's full of energy. It's full of creativity. And it doesn't help you to tamp it down. What you need to do is recognize it, embrace it, hug it, if you will, and then find a way to use it and channel it in productive manners.
I We're almost out of time, but I have to let my listeners know that I'm already immortalized because I am, if you go to May 30th of Robert's The Daily Laws, I'm in it. and
That's right.
and my show is in it.
That's right.
And
That's right.
when I came through it, and in fact, I was reading and reading, and I look and I go, oh my God. And I must tell you, Robert, I don't even know how to express myself. I'm so blown away by that. I feel like now when all your books get in the Smithsonian, I'll be there.
That's right. That's right. Well, hopefully all of your podcasts and television shows will still be in existence hundreds of years from now.
Well, they are in the cosmos, aren't they?
Yeah, because you've had some amazing guests lately. I'm very honored to be among them. Some very interesting people.
Oh, so Robert, you're still. Come on, you set the record. You're still one of the most absolute interesting people I ever had.
Okay. Well, thank you, Barry. But I'm very honored that I was able to put you in the book. Yeah, because some of my greatest pearls of wisdom have occurred on Barry Kibrick's shows. So naturally, I'm just kidding, but naturally we put it in the daily laws.
I want to use, before I end even, because you use these words, amor fati, love of fate. And I couldn't help but when I saw my own name in your book, I fell in love with the fate that happened. So, but there's something more to it in the book. And I think if you just shed a little light about that, the love of fate, because we don't often hear that. And you mention it once, but yet it prevails throughout. Does that make sense?
Yeah, all my books to some degree are about kind of accepting who we are and coming to terms with who we are and not fighting it, as I mentioned, with our dark side, as I mentioned, with our desires for power, etc. And so what amor fati is, it literally means love of fate. And it was first coined by the great German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. And it means that you have two ways you can go in life. Things happen and you can't control them. Events happen. Being born, you have no control over. Who your parents are, you have no control over. On and on and on. It is fate. Things happen, they just happen, right? You can go in one of two directions. You can love that fate. You can say it happened for a reason. It's beautiful. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to find a way to make it turn into something good for me. Or you could go the opposite way and say, I hate that. And you can turn into a chronic complainer in life. Oh, everything is against me. Oh, people don't like me. Oh, nothing is right in this world. Oh, woe is me, et cetera, et cetera. And when you complain, and I know myself because I have complaining tendencies that I struggle against. When you complain, basically you're saying you don't like life itself. You don't like the things that are occurring to you. You don't like the things that are happening that you have no control over, which is the nature of life itself, right? So you don't want to be someone who hates life because you're only alive once. Your days are numbered. You want to embrace, you want to love that little bit of life that you were given. And the main way to do that is to embrace the fate and say, everything that happens to me happens for a reason. Okay. So 3 years ago, I suffered a stroke, which is by far the worst thing that ever happened in my life, right? It completely ruined all of the things that I love to do in this world, hiking and swimming and bicycling and traveling, right? And I struggled with that early on. Oh, woe is me. Why did that happen? If only then. And slowly I learned to accept it and say that it occurred for a reason. And I've been able to develop other qualities in me that I never had, qualities of patience, qualities of embracing things instead of fighting against them, qualities of appreciating the world that is around me as opposed to taking it for granted. So I learned in a very harsh way to embrace even the worst of fate in that sense. So to me, amor fati is the most beautiful philosophy anybody could have. It means even the pain that comes, bring it on. I don't care. I love even the pain. It's fine because that's what life is about. Life inevitably involves pain and suffering and death, but I'm not going to deny it. I'm going to embrace it.
Robert, on that note, I want to embrace you. I want to thank you. You let us know that our brain was designed to lead us to mastery and the latent power within us all. Robert, you draw that out of me, at least, every time we are together. And I know you do, whoever picks up your book, The Daily Law, which is the Daily Laws, which is the new book out. And you know what's kind of neat too, is because you use your older books, I think it's going to make people want to dive deep into all of them. And I just thank you so much, Robert, for always taking the time to chat with me. You're a dear friend and just a man filled with grace and charm. And I'm very blessed to have you in my life.
Oh, well, I feel the same, Barry, and I just wish I could write more books so I could be on your show more often.
Well, you
That's
don't even
my only
have to.
Regret.
Nope, you don't have to write a book. You have a thought, you come on my show, okay?
All right.
All right, my friend.
Okay, thank you, Barry. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. You take care, Robert.
All right, take care, Barry.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more, please subscribe or become a patron of the show at barrykibrick.com to keep it going every week. Thank you.